Alright, so very quickly, there's a presentation called Make It Juicy. It's a presentation that I made for the Unity user group, and it's a very general information on the techniques that I use to make the games more engaging. It's mostly going to be about game feel and so forth. So let's start this presentation off by pressing the start button. Juice is a term coined by Kyle Gray, Kyle Gabler, Shalin Shodan, and Matt Kukic. It's supposed to represent feedback. So juice is a kind of feedback that makes a player feel more powerful and in control by signifying how they're doing per interaction. This game is going to be basically a series of Flappy Bird clones, but the point is, with each one of them, I'm going to be adding a new kind of juice to improve the feel of the game as I go along. And I think, like, visually, you can easily tell from visually looking at it that the game is going to be more fun as we progressively go on. So let's start with the first one. The first one is kind of like the mistakes that I see everyone make. I know I made these kind of mistakes as well. So here we are. You know, the character drops really slowly. I'm tapping a lot right now. You can probably hear the mouse clicks, and the pillars are coming in very slowly, and yeah, so this is kind of like everybody's first Flappy Bird game. It's a very slow moving game. That the amount of clicks I have to do to actually raise myself up to a higher level is a huge struggle on its own, and so forth. So the first thing I'm usually concerned about when I'm doing these kind of things is that I want to make sure that the control feels tight. So let's go back to the menu, and let's kind of go back to the next scene, which is that one thing I do is I bump up the gravity value. The Unity default gravity value is 9.81. I just bump it up to 40 immediately. That to me generally feels more natural, and I found that yeah, the Unity physics engine is just really slow for no good reason. Additionally, to counter the gravity movement, I'm also increasing the amount of force that the Flappy Bird flies upwards. And on top of that, I give him more aerial height to that. So it's probably like 10 or it's almost 10 times. Each time he's flapping, he's going up by almost 10 times the amount before. And as you can tell, because I'm falling very quickly, I have to like really keep a steady rhythm to make this happen. Let me try that again. It's a Let's Player's curse. I'm trying to play and comment, explain at the same time. But already, like, you can kind of tell that this is much closer to what made Flappy Bird more popular. This very wonky physics of you're in a sense of panic because all the things are moving a lot faster. And having things feel like they're under your control, to have it so that each mouse click feels more effective, is by and far going to be important for your game. So make sure that when your game is about getting from point A to point B, make it so that the player who's like pressing D or the right key feels like they're traveling fast enough to get from point A to point B. Or like if it's jumping, make sure that the jumping feels good. Make sure that jumping feels like they have control over it, that the trajectory, the fall, all feels natural. It's kind of something that you have to practice a little bit, but starting off with just bumping up the gravity on the Unity's default engine is a pretty good start to do so. Now that we fixed the controls, it's obvious that the stalagmites and the stalactites, basically those little pipes that appears, doesn't move fast enough. So what I'm going to be doing in the next one is I'm trying to bring the action much more sooner to the player. There's a very long lull in the beginning. I'm going to chop that off to half, and then have all of these obstacles scroll in very quickly. So yeah, this already feels better. It's already like, okay, I'm getting to the actions sooner. I'm getting to the whole thing. It feels good. The controls now feels good, and so forth. Next is sound. I know a lot of people, when they posted on the Dulu Dandari blog, that they weren't going to have time to put in sound. I cannot recommend this enough. You've got to put in sound. It's huge. It's necessary. I mean, listen to this already. It's a small change, but already each mouse click feels better because I'm getting more sensory output. I'm experiencing more from the game just by clicking. And that's kind of an important thing. It's kind of a reoccurring message as I go along with this. So one small change I would recommend when you're pulling in sound, and this is incredibly easy. When you're programming it, it's only like a few lines long. One thing that's really important to do is anytime you're playing a sound effect that's going to be repeated very frequently, such as the flaps in this Flappy Bird game, you want to be able to randomize it, kind of mutate in it in a small way that would make each of those flaps sound different, because it's going to get repetitive very, 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 very fast. So here I'm going to randomize the pitch of the flaps. It's a very subtle effect, but you can actually kind of hear it right now. So let's try actually playing it. And having that kind of randomization makes the sound effects sound less boring, less repetitive. It's just a small minor aesthetic change, but it really helps. So now that we got sound effects in there, it's also a good idea to put in the music that's actually fitting to the game. In this case, I'm using Call to Adventure by Kevin MacLeod, so let's just kind of play it with the music going. So as you can probably tell, music does a great job setting up the mood of the game. Already it's like, okay, this is an adventure. This is something that I'm trying to play for. There's something going on in the game. And it's kind of an important thing to be able to set the mood as soon as possible within the game. You want to provide the player as much context in the way they're playing that game as much as possible. So those kind of music cues tends to really help. All right, so next is going to be the scrolling background. Up to this point, basically all the obstacles have been moving, but not the background or the bottom or the top portion, the grounds, were moving either. So these are kind of important to, this kind of looks weird, and it's pretty simple to just have them scrolling and make it look better. One very effective effect, by the way, that a lot of people use in Ludum Dare and elsewhere is that if you have like a 2D game, you want to be able to scroll different planes of the backgrounds in different speed. This is called parallaxing, and you're actually seeing one right now where the blue background is moving slower than the front one, so that kind of gives a lot more depth to the game. So this is what it now looks like. So immediately what you can see is that all the obstacles now feel like they're moving with the whole level. To put it another way, programming wise, it looks like all I did was have it so that everything is scrolling to the left. But now it visually looks like that Flappy Fly is moving to the right, flying to the right. And that makes more contextual sense because we get the establishment that he is a fly, and it just kind of doesn't make a whole lot of sense that these things are moving by themselves. So in this case, we're now getting reference that, the fly is actually moving towards a pillar this time. Moving on to animations. Animations are absolutely huge. I can tell you I'm a programmer and I can't animate for crud. But what I can do is that I can easily just squish them, rotate them, scale them pretty easily. Again, because I'm a programmer, I can do those kind of things and figure out those kind of information. And most often, usually that alone can give a really good, really satisfying effect on the action that the game takes. So here in this case, I'm basically rotating Flappy Fly based off of the vertical velocity. And then obviously I'm also wiggling those pillars, and then I have it fall and just kind of fall like that. These are kind of important. You're giving more context as to what each of your action takes. Again, you want to make sure that each button press feels like they have more impact, and by adding more and more feedback to that, you're achieving to that effect. Particle effects is another huge thing. I like to put a lot of particle effects in here, so I just kind of dumped all of them at once at this point. Let's just kind of watch it first, and then I'll go over what each one does. Alright, well, let's try that again. That was not satisfying. Okay, so what were the particle effects? Yeah, he's burning, it's kind of funny. What were the particle effects all for? We have the little trail thing that was going on. That is really useful in the sense that it's telling you what a success, how, you know, what the trajectory of Flappy Fly is as he's flying through. You're giving more information on that. We have a little Tinkerbell effect when every time he flaps. This is to, again, provide more feedback to each flap. We have the explosion on when he collides, telling you where you collided, and we have the burning effect to let you know that he's dead. And these are all like extra information. They're actually useful information to the player. When you're adding in particle effects, it is good to add a lot of them in there, but more critically, you want to make sure that said particle effects provide actual context. They provide more information to the player, more useful information to the player, giving them some sort of subtle hints and clues to getting towards where they want to go, or to get the effects, to really understand the effect that they have just made. Now with that, at this point, I thought like the background was really boring, so I added in a bunch of leaves, like so. This is actually the only change I made, but then really the point is to make it so that even the background looks animated. Because as of right now, it doesn't look all that interesting to look at. Now, at least we have something to look at in the background. Alright, so far all we've done is that we've tried to make the controls feel really tight. We're trying to give a lot of feedback every time you're touching the mouse click button, and it all feels good at that point. But one problem we're having is that we don't have any sort of success state, some sort of feedback that you have succeeded in making the game. So one thing that I like to use is I like to use a lot of physics. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have it so that each time you go through each of those pillars or spikes or whatever, each time you pass through those, that I'm going to basically break them and crumble them apart. And physics is kind of those huge things that like a lot of people likes to see. So let's give this a shot and see what it looks like now. So yeah, that took a lot of time for me to construct, but it's it's actually pretty easy to put together if you're using game engines like Unity, or I don't know if Construct 2 has that kind of stuff. Whoops, excuse me. So what did I do? What I did was I simply replaced each of those pillars every time with a bunch of smaller squares. I made a bunch of little collider boxes on each one of them, and I made sure that I added rigid bodies on each one of those, and I made sure that each one of them were really bouncy. You want to make sure the game feels very bouncy, because every time you like hit something or you throw something, you want to make that feel like it had an impact. So in this case, I tried to make sure I gave as much impact as possible by creating a really bouncy, lots of small lots of small segments of those pillars, and just kind of let the physics engine go loose with it. One really powerful effect, and one that is incredibly hard to utilize, I wouldn't say incredibly hard, one that's easy to abuse, and when you abuse it, it looks awful, is camera shakes. Camera shakes are awesome when you see it in action. But at some point you want to make sure that you're not overusing them too much. Here's a case where I'm just kind of using it specifically for death sequences and every time you're passing through those pillars. It should be pretty obvious. Yeah, there's a little camera shake there every time I go through a pillar. And then I die and then it rotates like that. Like I said, camera shakes are very effective. You want to make sure that you're not overusing them, because it's also very disorienting at certain points. But anytime you're using a camera shake, you want to make sure that it's either for like really hard hitting things like shotguns, or machine guns are kind of a good thing too. Especially if you're making like a first person shooter, if you're shooting something, you want to make sure that the camera shakes a little bit. Just that small feedback is really useful. Likewise, if you die, you know, having you fall over is a very useful information. It just looks awesome. Another thing that's really effective and that's really, really effective is using camera flashes, excuse me, not camera flashes, basically screen flashes where either the entire screen or some objects, some small object starts flashing. And also anytime you're just kind of like slowing down or making time faster or even just stopping time entirely. These are pretty effective at, because they're kind of like camera shakes in the sense that because they're all full screen effects, they're terribly easy to abuse and it's very disorienting if you do that. But here I'm doing a quick demonstration. Every time you're going through the pillar, I pause the time just ever so slightly and flash the pillars themselves. It's a small effect, and especially compared to the camera shakes, not as effective, but it's also really telling. It's kind of like giving you more satisfaction, more information as to actually completing each of these pillar stuff. And make death look a lot more dramatic. So at that point, we have all those stuff, it all looks good. Now the question is simply polishing the game to the effect to provide more purpose to the player. So this is an arcade game. The easiest way to kind of make an arcade game feel like it's purposeful, to have some sort of meaning to it, is by adding a score system. So here all I did was add in a score at the top of the screen there. And every time you pass through a pillar, it'll give you the number 1, letting you know that you scored 1 point. To remind you that, hey, we're recording your score. Anytime you're kind of reminding the player of anything, that whatever action they're taking is giving them a score, you want to be able to show them in a clear and obvious fashion. You'll notice, by the way, I added in a lot of animation to that one thing appearing. You want to be able to do the same thing as well. By the way, so up to that point, I've been saying like every time you clear through pillars, it'll be like, okay, you get score 1, 2, 3, but that alone is generally not all that interesting. One very easy method to make that feel more satisfying is simply by increasing the quantity of that. So here, instead of getting 1 point every time you pass through the pillars, I just give you 1,000 just for the heck of it. Like so. And I added a little gem in there. I'm going to go over those later, but yeah, adding sort of any optional quest, optional stuff that they can collect is always a very useful feedback. I mean, you're giving them now a risk versus reward system, which is very important in any kind of video game. Now I'm going to be adding a little difficulty to the game, because if you look at it very carefully, and actually Flappy Bird original game did this too, the speed doesn't actually increase, and that tends to get very boring to people who are like really good at this game. They want to see it become more and more challenging. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. I'm also letting them know right from the get-go that there's a high score that they need to get. With the high score thing, you're also giving them a reason to try to beat the game. There we go, so now I have a new high score. Yeah, it's always important to let them know if they got a new high score or not. I made this so that it won't say new high score if you didn't get a new high score, but regardless, you want to make sure you have those kind of information. The only problem with using a new high score system is that for the people who just kind of started playing it, it's not a very good motivator. They're going to get like, few points only, and then you're asking them to beat that, which is not itself a very interesting objective to complete. So one easy way to do this is to add sort of an achievement system, to give them a threshold to say, hey, you get this reward if you complete up to this much. Right, for this game, I'm using flags, just because, but I'm letting you know right from the get-go how many points you need to get the next flag. And this is kind of a very important mechanical change, because now you're shifting the goal from what was originally just a high score and getting better at the game to now what is a threshold that you haven't beaten yet, but is totally possible to beat. So let me see if I can beat this score that I totally posed myself, and was probably a bad idea to put it that high for presentation purposes. There we go. And you'll notice I actually put in a little reminder that they got that achievement. It's again more feedback. Let them know that let them know as early as possible that they achieved something. I wasn't able to demonstrate earlier. I'm playing this a lot longer now to be able to demonstrate that yes, this game is actually getting faster. Oh man, I missed that one. Alright, so already at this point the game feels awesome. We have all these stuff happening, we have all these kind of, we have an achievement system going on, it's very satisfying, it's awesome. But now, a very fascinating question that some people might be asking is when you want to actually not use juice. Long story short, I can't think of a moment where you don't want to use juice, but I can think of moments where you want to be careful at how much juice you use versus in other scenarios within a single game. You want to make sure that the problem with juice is that they tend to be very distracting. They tend to also take away a lot of the seriousness from a scenario. So if you're trying to create like a very story-heavy game, you're going to notice that not that many games uses particle effects or that kind of particle effects or physics engines to make it juicy because they want you to focus on the story itself. Same thing for GUIs. GUIs adding in animations and small sort of special effects are awesome, but you don't want to add all of them like screen flashes or camera shakes. Those really don't make sense in a GUI standpoint. So you really want to make sure that you understand the exact scenario, what your intended goal is on each part of the game. So, like I said, most games tend to reduce juice during story segments and GUI segments. And the GUI right here isn't very juicy. I'm just showing the scrolling background and that's about it. And I even turned the music off by default. In this next game, I'm going to be reducing the juice drastically when I start throwing in a very shoddily written and last-minute thought-up story. So here we go. You might also notice that I turned off the score entirely. Score kind of really demeans the story because now you're saying, oh, I'm playing to get a better score. Now, granted, I was kind of a lazy programmer and left all the juice in there, but still, this part is meant to be fun anyway, so it makes perfect sense to have all these juice at this point. It's getting faster. Oh gosh. Oh gosh. Well, I got an achievement, that's good. Oh! On Tuesday, December 2nd, the last Flappy Fly died. While migrating to south, he collapsed before collapsing in exhaustion. As his life flashed before his eyes, he recalled a simpler time. So what happened? Why did I make those decisions that I did? So obviously I have this whole fun game mechanic aspect of it, and then I'm contrasting it with the story segment towards the end where there was almost nothing, no particle effects, only animations and sound effects to really accompany that. And the whole intent really was that the whole beginning part, remember I said earlier that I didn't put in the score system, I didn't say this is the high score you want to get or achievement you want to get, because that kind of distracts a player from the actual objective of the game at this point, which is to kind of appreciate the story for what it is, whatever that story was. But again, to contrast that, and now I have this segment where you're taking it a lot more seriously now. You have a lot less. You're coming with a lot less goofy stuff, and it's just like It's just very mellow. It's very there's not a whole lot going on. And you want to make sure that during those specific moments that when you're telling your story, you want to make sure that they can actually stay focused on what's going on, what story is going on, and so forth. Earlier, there's a lot of people that will be saying like art games are boring. This is kind of one reason why, because they want when you're trying to make some sort of like narrative games or some sort of very important games, you want to make sure that they focus on the subject matter itself instead of the whole game mechanic, like the scoring system or any sort of that kind of stuff, because that's really distracting to the whole experience.